Part 55. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 549. A white light flashed, revealing the figures of Fatty, Gyatso and the monk. Hiss, I feel so uncomfortable, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. As soon as the fat man came out, he hugged his chest and shouted for help in an exaggerated way. Gyatso smiled, while the monk shook his head slightly speechlessly. But, Fatty, even ordinary people who enter the periphery of the radiation area will not die instantly. They will only leave the root of the disease and soon develop irreversible diseases that are difficult to cure. You are still a senior listener, although Taoism does not have physical combat. It's not an advantage, but your Taoist physique is not papery, so it won't be so unbearable. Moreover, the time in the story world should not be very long. These radiations will cause some damage to our bodies, but not too much. We are leaving this story world after all, and radio will also repair the body. Of course, if you can't leave, you don't have to worry about the damage of radiation to your body. If you can't leave, you don't need to care, because that means you failed the mission and have died in the story world. At this time, the position of the three of them is similar to the slope of a mountain road. In front of them is a county town, or a town similar to a relatively developed point in China. It is all Korean-style architecture, and further away in the woods there are several very iconic buildings, which are nuclear power plants. If nothing else, this is the goal in this story world. Broadcast, the main mission has not been released yet, Gyatso said to the monk. The monk nodded. Generally speaking, this requires us to explore the story world ourselves to inspire the main mission, but the poor monk did not expect that this time we would be able to be in a story world with you. Fatty, how long have I been asleep? I don't know, 2 months. It's almost that long. You two have been sleeping beauty for 2 months. The fat man scratched his head. Here, he didn't even dare to take a big breath. The Taoist people are very particular about breathing and maintaining health. He is very sensitive to the surrounding environment. At this time, Fatty naturally dislikes this nuclear contaminated environment as much as he wants. Where is Subai? The monk asked. Is he okay? The monk's memory only stayed at the time when the three of him were trapped on the line of life and death by 8,000 resentful souls, and then fell into a deep coma. However, since he can enter the story world now, he must have been trapped in the real world. Safely protected, Gyatso was the same. Dabai, it's very good. He can eat and sleep. He plays with his son during the day and sleeps smelling your body fragrance, monk, at night. He lives a very comfortable life. The fat man joked. Hearing smell your own body fragrance to sleep, even if you are as calm as a monk, you can't help but twitching the corner of your mouth slightly. There seems to be a checkpoint behind that. Gyatso pointed to the back. I saw those patrolling soldiers who seemed to be wearing radiation protection suits. Although these radiations did not have a great impact on the audience, in line with the cautious style, the monk, Gyatso, and the fat man still went to the checkpoint over there and forcibly grabbed 3 sets of radiation protection suits to wear on himself. In the story world, retaining even a little more of yourself may become the key to deciding your life or death at a special moment. As for leaving here and escaping from this radiation area after grabbing the radiation protection suits, the 3 of them are not that stupid. There are some rules. Even if the broadcast does not go into detail, the listeners still understand that since the broadcast defines the theme of this story world as nuclear, then if you dare to think that you are smart enough to run outside, leave this environment, and go to other places in Korea or even running to the 3 fatties territory, let's not talk about whether the story world is that big. If it is that big, then if you dare to play like this, the broadcast will definitely not be stingy in telling you why the flowers are so red. For example, if the theme of a story world is zombies, and the scene you are in at the beginning is a Yizhuang, then you have to stay in the Yizhuang before the main line of the story is expanded, even if there is no iron cage outside the Yizhuang to trap you. Come on, even if you know that the coffin in Yizhuang will be dishonest tonight, you still have to pretend to know nothing and continue to stay here and wait for danger to appear. At most, you can prepare some extra ghost coins to burn. Let's go and look inside. Since this is the area of nuclear leakage, I guess no one lives in that county. The monk said something and walked forward first. Gyatso and Fatty naturally followed the monk. After passing the turning intersection in front, we entered the county town. At this time, the monk's brow suddenly frowned, and Gyatso and the fat man also clearly noticed something strange. The energy fluctuations on the other side of the road are very strong, there should be a fight, the monk said. It seems that there are quite a lot of listeners who have entered the story world, and we can meet them so early and start a fight. Gyatso smiled. The first story world that I have been waiting for several months is the highlight. Let's ignore them and continue walking inside. Before we understand some of the context of the story world, we will keep a low profile. Moreover, the poor monk always feels that since the three of us are already here, then Dabai will be the same. The probability of entering this story world should also be high. But why didn't Dabai show up with us? Fatty asked doubtfully. Maybe somewhere else. The three of them walked into the county town while communicating in low voices. Although it is said to be a county town, it is actually not very large. The highway in the mountains runs directly through the county town. On one side is the sea, then the road, on the other side are storefronts, and inside are Korean-style houses, which look quite orderly. Orderly. The three monks were walking side by side on the empty street. No one could be seen here for the time being, and it could be seen from the storefronts and some details on the street that the era of nuclear radiation must have been a long time ago. When the three of them passed by a prop shop, the monk suddenly frowned and his eyes drifted towards the prop shop vaguely. This was a prop shop focusing on comic characters. There were a lot of simulated props and dolls in it. Basically, the more popular comic elements on the internet can be found here, but they are obviously in a state of disrepair. Even if the owner of the store is still alive, he will never come to take care of it again. I don't know why, the monk suddenly felt a little uneasy. This may be the monk's induction, but the monk didn't really stop to go in and take a look, but continued to walk forward. However, what the monk didn't realize was that he was not the only one. When Gyatso and Fatty passed by, they suddenly felt something was wrong in their hearts. However, Gyatso and Fatty were similar and thought it was the environment of the story world. As a result, I didn't really think that there might be something fishy in the prop shop. If the monk had known that the three of them had felt something in their hearts just now, he probably wouldn't have gone any further. But this time, the three of them just walked over. When they reached the end of the street and were about to leave the county, the three of them stopped. What should we do? Keep going? Go directly to the nuclear power plant to trigger the mission, Fatty asked. Usually when he is with the monk, Fatty still prefers to listen to the monk's opinions, because the monk is good at large-scale layout and planning. Fatty, knowing that I am only good at small aspects of coping and reaction, both parties have their own strengths. The monk took a deep breath, turned around, looked at the county town again, withdrew his gaze and looked ahead of him. Then he walked along the road through the forest in front and reached the nuclear power plant. It's better to play it safe and not be so aggressive. Gyatso looked around and said, there are a lot of people coming in this time, so let others explore the way for us first. Okay, let's just wander around and walk slowly, the fat man naturally agreed. Prop shop. Vampire coffin. According to the plot in the previous reincarnation, Subai should have woken up from the coffin when the monks and the others entered the story world and just entered the county, then staggered out of the prop shop and fell into the sea. Were discovered by Fatty and the others. But it seems that because Subai forcibly condensed the memory of the last time into a drop of his own blood, this time he was even weaker than when he was lying here last time. Until the monk and the others passed through the county seat, Subai haven't woken up naturally yet. The plot, at this time, had a deviation, and this deviation was actually inevitable. Although the story world or the Black Ball had always wanted to straighten everything out and start over in the original way, they wanted to completely. It is impossible to follow the script completely. But, at this time, on the street outside the prop shop, two people, a man and a woman, walked up. The man was very short. If he were shorter, he could be called a dwarf. The woman was very tall and had a delicate face. But it is so delicate that it seems to be artificially carved, somewhat similar to the standard model face of Korean actresses. Yingai, you met me as soon as you entered the story world. Don't you feel lucky? Pan Wenji said with a flattering and obscene smile on his face. Jin Young-ae only made a nasal noise in response. Pan Wenji was not upset after eating a weak nail. For him, it was indeed a very happy thing for him to find a companion with an enhanced melee system so quickly in the story world. However, when Pan Wenji walked through the props store, the bell on his waist suddenly rang softly. Pan Wenji immediately raised his hand to signal to stop, and then he turned his attention to the convenience store beside him. There are living people inside. Although their vital signs are very weak and frail, they are indeed alive. Pan Wenji and Jin Ying-gae slowly walked into the prop shop. At Pan Wenji's signal, Jin Ying-gae approached the vampire coffin and opened it. Inside lay a man with ulcers all over his body, almost in a semi-rotted state. The moment Pan Wenji saw the man, an uncontrollably excited smile appeared on his face. Haha, I'm getting rich, God helps me, God helps me. The little man was almost dancing with excitement. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 550. You have me, do you need to make another puppet according to your usual style? Jin Ying-gae looked a little surprised as Pan Wenji took out an insect egg from his arms. She knew how precious Pan Wenji's eggs were, and the two of them also knew that in this story world, there must be many other listeners scattered around, and they could continue to look for other listeners to form a team. Planting insect eggs can be used to extend your life at critical moments. Although the insect eggs entering the body means becoming a puppet, you are still alive. When you are about to die, do you want to die slowly or choose to become a puppet? Leave a ray of hope? I believe most listeners will choose the latter. Haha, if you don't give it to me, what's the use of you? Pan Wenji seemed to be a little incoherent because he saw the seriously injured Subai. In fact, Pan Wenji's psychology is also easy to guess, and the rest of the cooperation the audience is not as friendly as the puppet that one personally controls. This puppet can protect itself desperately at critical moments, but can the rest of the audience? Jin Ying-gae looked at the man lying in the coffin and sighed. Sometimes, she had to believe that people with some physical disabilities often have some abnormalities in their minds. Come on, little darling, this is for you to eat. Pan Wenji put an insect egg into a cracked piece of rotten meat of Subai. The egg began to dissolve and turned into countless white worms, spreading out into Subai's body. This scene was enough to make the dense people with phobias faint from fear. Then, Pan Wenji started a series of rituals, which were puppet-making rituals. Some rituals had their own effects, and some rituals were really just rituals, just to satisfy Pan Wenji's own needs. At the same time, Kim Young-ae also took action at Pan Wenji's request to forcibly knock out the man's possible consciousness. Even if Pan Wenji did not ask, Kim Young-ae would do this just in case. For some reason, the moment she opened the vampire's coffin, Kim Young-ae felt as if she had opened the disaster cartridge herself. Finally, when everything was done, Pan Wenji took down the can of sardines that had been covered with a layer of black ash from the shelf, tore off the lid, poured it into his mouth. The canned fish was already smelly and turned into a dark mass, but Pan Wenji still ate it with gusto, licked his lips with great enjoyment, then threw away the can, crossed his hands, and drank lowly. The man lying in the coffin stood up slowly at this time, his eyes were dull and his movements were slightly stiff. When he stood up, a drop of blood on the man's right cheek quietly blended into the man's skin. Of course, because the rotten places on the man's body were too many and too dense, Pan Wenji and Jin Ying'ai didn't notice this small detail. At this time, they really couldn't realize how terrible the weight this drop of blood carried. Walk. Pan Wenji waved his hand, and the man naturally followed him out of the prop shop. Why do I feel a little worried? Jin Ying'ai frowned and said, why is it that when we just entered the story world, an Eastern listener was inexplicably seriously injured and lying here? Look at the injuries on his body and the dust on the coffin. Obviously he has been lying here for a long time, and it is even possible that he entered the story world before us. Hey, what does this have to do with us? I only know that I successfully made him into a puppet while he was in a dying state. This is enough. Pan Wenji reached out and patted Jin Ying'ai's shoulder. Don't worry, don't you still know my skills? No matter whether this guy was a dragon or a phoenix before, as long as he falls into my hands, he will be my weapon. If I ask him to thrust forward, he must thrust forward. If I ask him to break, he must break. Jin Ying'ai was still a little uneasy. At this moment, behind the two of them, there was a sudden crunching sound of bones. It was so dense and intense that it made people's scalp numb. Pan Wenji and Jin Ying'ai immediately stopped and turned their heads to look behind them. The man who had just been made into a puppet by Pan Wenji was standing there, with many parts of his body bulging, and the bones in his body seemed to be also keep reconnecting. He is. Jin Ying'ai subconsciously stretched out her arms and released the special metal thorns. Pan Wenji raised his head, blocked Jin Ying'ai, and said, it should be that the bugs I gave him have worked. He is recovering from his injuries. This is also normal. However, I am a little surprised. His injuries, how much does it weigh? Here, Pan Wenji had just finished speaking, and over there, Subai slowly closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, Subai's eyes showed a touch of clarity. This clear gaze is absolutely impossible for a puppet without self-awareness to have. Subai stretched out his hands. Judging from the palms of his hands, his injuries were quite serious. Although he was barely at a serious level, it seemed that one insect egg was not enough to fully restore him to his peak state. It's not that Subai doesn't want to pretend to be a pig and eat the tiger, and continue to follow Pan Wenji around like last time, but because this time, after absorbing the drop of blood, Subai's memory about the last time has revived, and he has actually been lucky enough. A small bug was opened by coincidence, but you must know that there is a guy who can get in there by his own wisdom without using bugs at all. He doesn't have a lot of time. You still have 2 insect eggs, give them to me, I won't kill you. Subai raised his head, looked at Pan Wenji and said. Subai spoke Chinese, which also showed Pan Wenji and others that he was an audience from the Chinese circle. Jin Ying'ai took a step forward and yelled at Pan Wenji with some dissatisfaction, look at the stupid thing you did. Pan Wenji swallowed subconsciously. Obviously, no one was more shocked than him at this time. How can it be? I obviously just successfully made him into a puppet. Pan Wenji subconsciously began to summon the bugs, but what surprised him was that he could no longer sense the bugs. The wireworms he had raised by himself seemed to have completely disappeared. You. Pan Wenji can speak some Chinese. In fact, there are indeed many people in South Korea who can speak a little Chinese, especially the audience. Their life level is higher than that of ordinary people. Normally speaking, their learning ability is much higher than that of ordinary people. Simple, it is not too difficult to learn some foreign languages. Subai shook his head. He knew that if he spoke like this, the other party would not give him the eggs, and he really didn't want to delay it any longer. The only thing that made Subai a little baffled was that he actually failed to meet Fatty and the others this time. Otherwise, if Fatty and the others were standing here at this time, things would be much simpler. After all, I am not at my peak now. Can you still control him? After Jin Yingge asked, she realized that she had asked nonsense. Pan Wenji gritted his teeth. I don't know what caused the scene to appear, but I have a hunch that by taking him down, we can get extremely important information. Moreover, I have a hunch that the other party seems to be familiar with us, but I can be sure that I have never seen this Chinese person before. While talking, Pan Wenji looked around with a look of contemplation in his eyes. Yo! Did you find anything? A smile appeared at the corner of Sudbai's mouth. At this time, Sudbai's rotten skin had completely fallen off and been replaced by a new layer of skin. Although his physical condition was not at its peak, it was still barely able to fight. Another reason was that, after experiencing 2 nuclear radiations, Sudbai was like a piece of miscellaneous iron. After being tempered twice, although he did not get any improvement from the energy level, and even became weaker, but at the essence level it's definitely improved a lot compared to before. It's better to be steel than to be tempered 100 times. Sudbai remembered that he had a special reward that he had never used, which was to return to a story world he had experienced for a while. He had never encountered a story world worth going back to before, but this time it seemed different. If he felt that it was suitable in the future, if so, you can use that reward to return to the story world and experience the baptism of nuclear radiation again. The pain is painful, but the benefits are absolutely considerable. Boom! Sudbai kicked the ground with one foot, and his whole body was ejected, like a cannonball, hitting Pan Wenji with an absolutely fierce attitude. Because Sudbai knew very well that Pan Wenji must not be given enough time to perform, otherwise he would definitely turn into a piece of brown candy that would give him a headache. Jin Yingge shouted low and stabbed out with both arms, trying to stop Sudbai and buy Pan Wenji time. However, Sudbai's fist turned almost dark black at this time, with blood lines running through it, facing Jin Yingge's fist. The metal thorns directly hit him. Boom! Jin Yingge's legs were tightly stretched, but her body subconsciously slid backwards, directly smashing the outer wall of a store behind her. There was also a deep shock in her eyes. The other party is still seriously injured. How terrible would it be if he fully recovered? Who is this Chinese audience? Before Pan Wenji's bell rang, a strong chill had already enveloped him. Sudbai's momentum continued unabated, and he broke through the 3 barriers that Pan Wenji had hastily arranged with the arrogant attitude, and then hooked Pan Wenji with his right arm. Pan Wenji's neck, he took out the Hellfire shotgun with his left hand and pointed it at Pan Wenji's head. Insect eggs, you have 2 more, give them all to me. After saying this, Sudbai spit out a mouthful of blood and sprayed it all over Pan Wenji. The forceful attack just now had exhausted all the power Sudbai could squeeze out of his severely injured body. Fortunately, the overall situation has been decided. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 551. You're very weak right now. Pan Wenji spoke to Sudbai in very poor Chinese. Yes, I am indeed very weak now, but I still have the strength to pull the trigger. Sudbai's chin rested on Pan Wenji's short shoulder, but the seriousness in his words was very clear. Threaten. Sudbai never accepts threats from others, and rarely threatens for the sake of threatening. For some reason, Pan Wenji felt that if he didn't give him the eggs, he would really shoot him, even if he was killed by Jin Yingge after his death. Pan Wenji is a very conceited person, and conceited people are often extremely sensitive people. This is not a negotiation, and the other party has no intention of negotiating terms with me. Okay. After a brief hesitation, Pan Wenji gave in. Although insect eggs are precious, his own life is even more precious. If his life is still there, the insect eggs can continue to be cultivated. If his life is gone, there will be nothing. In the game rules and ecosystem of radio and listeners, listeners know better that nothing is more precious than the last breath they have left, because as long as you still have breath, radio can also take you there after you leave the story world. Complete recovery in an instant. 2 insect eggs floated out from Pan Wenji's clothes. Subai smiled, reached out, grabbed the 2 eggs, and put them into his mouth without hesitation. Pan Wenji even heard a crunching sound similar to chewing jelly beans, which made Pan Wenji feel as if 10,000 chickens were rushing past. What kind of freak was this? Because in the Eastern circles, the Chinese audience circle rarely intersects with the Korean and Japanese audience circles, there is a saying circulating in the Korean and Japanese circles that among opponents of the same level, the audiences in the Chinese circle are often more terrifying. Because they are utilitarian and because of their more brutal competitive environment. Compared with the Korean and Japanese listeners whose internal circles are relatively harmonious and who need broadcasters to step down to create conflicts between the Korean and Japanese circles, they are a bit like flower buds in the greenhouse compared with the Chinese circle listeners. Otherwise, they would not have much influence. Have enough leisure time to evolve your own strengthening into a real profession. A samurai needs to have the appearance and habits of a samurai, and a ninja needs to have the creed and elegance of a ninja. These things are just a waste of time in the eyes of Chinese audiences. Will you kill me? Pan Wenji asked. Subai has already swallowed 2 insect eggs. With these 2 eggs as a foundation, he can basically recover from his injuries. If the blood of the 2 senior listeners in front of him can be added, then you can directly return to your peak state. But after thinking about it, Subai still replied, "No, I won't kill you." "Yes. What if I still need you to give me bugs to eat in my next reincarnation? Kill you and you might be absorbed by someone else." Letting go and putting away the Hellfire shotgun, Subai gently patted Pan Wenji on the shoulder, turned around, and left. Pan Wenji turned around and looked at Subai's back. Jin Yingei came over at this time. "Don't chase," Jin Yingei asked. "If you dare to chase, do you still need to ask me?" Pan Wenji shook his head and sighed. He began to raise his head again, looked at the dark sky, gritted his teeth. "Tell me, is there something wrong with this story world? This is a stop leading from the county town to the nuclear power plant. In the past, ordinary civilian vehicles were absolutely not allowed to appear here, but this stop plays a very important audit and warning role. However, what originally needed to be protected in this station has exploded, and this place has completely become a no man's land." The 3 fat men deliberately slowed down their progress. Everything was exactly the same as in the last reincarnation. The smarter people are, sometimes, the more cautious they are and the better they know their choices. Therefore, for the fat man and the monk, even if they are given 10 more reincarnations, they will still follow this rhythm and deliberately slow down, instead of being the first ones to enter the nuclear power plant. This is where they are different from Subai. If Subai is reincarnated 10 times, probably most of the time Subai will choose to follow the crowd and walk slowly, taking his time and letting others go first. We'll talk about exploring the way ahead, but it's probably going to happen once or twice. Young Master Su suddenly lost his temper and hurriedly broke into the nuclear power plant. The fat man leaned against a wall and took off his helmet. He was wearing a radiation-proof suit. It was actually very uncomfortable. Taking it off at this time was a kind of self-relaxation. Even if it caused more radiation for the fat man, it didn't matter. "I haven't met Dabai yet. Maybe Dabai is really not in this story world," Fatty muttered. The monk shook his head, but along the way, the monk seemed to be shaking his head frequently. In the monk's opinion, Subai should also be in this story world. Since the broadcast arranged the 3 of them together, it would not be wrong. As for the lack of one of the three, this is also a pity for broadcasting. But where did Subai go? From the beginning of the story world, was he not in the same place as himself and others? The monk closed his eyes. He felt as if he had thought of something, but it was so vague. For example, from the beginning of the story world? The most critical thing is that the main mission has not been released on the radio, so now we are like a poor woman with bound feet in ancient times, stumbling with no goals and no motivation. The fat man yawned and stretched. It was already evening, and the sky was gradually changing from drowsy to dark. This is quite lyrical, Gyatso smiled. At this moment, the monk, who had already sat down cross-legged to meditate and plan to rest, suddenly stood up and looked towards the forest opposite. The fat man also sensed this, and looked at each other with Gyatso, and the two of them immediately stood up. How alert! In the woods, a man wearing casual clothes walked out. The man was very handsome, giving people the feeling of a big boy next door. There was no sharpness in his whole body. In short, he made people feel very comfortable. But among those who can be an audience and appear in this level of difficulty, who has never had blood on their hands? Who has not seen numerous births and deaths? This guy is actually able to resolve everything and only reveal his spring-like temperament, which in itself explains a lot. Munan, I didn't expect to meet you in this story world. The fat man stared at the man walking out of the woods, his voice seemed a bit deep. It's just that you failed to trick me last time and I fought back in self-defense. You don't need to keep such a small thing in mind, right? Amitba, what's the matter? The monk clasped his hands together and acted very politely. Of course, this was because 4 more people came out of the forest behind Munan. One of them, a woman, made the monk take a second look. Not because of beauty, but because the monk felt that the other person's aura seemed a bit unstable. Was he injured? It would be hard to tell if Munan was the only one who came out and the monk was still rude. It's nothing, we just happened to meet each other. Munan looked very casual. I discovered that there are listeners from other countries in this story world. In this case, our own domestic listeners should not say that they are united as a monolith, but we must say hello first. Unless it is really necessary, we should try our best not to take action internally, as it is not cost-effective for foreigners to take advantage. The fat man twitched his face and said, you also care about this? Of course I care about this. Munan pursed his lips. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. I believe that you won't join our team, so I won't invite you. I wish you all the best. Survive this story world smoothly. Munan turned around and was about to leave. When he turned around, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something and asked, by the way, I remember receiving a message. You all seem to be living in Shanghai now, right? But you seem to be 4 people, where's the other one? Did you arrange for the broadcast to enter the story world? Fatty asked nonchalantly. Whoever it arranges to enter the story world also needs your approval. Hearing this sarcastic answer, Munan, who had his back to the 3 fat men, had a look of surprise on his face. He didn't care whether it was sarcastic or not, because he had already got the answer he needed. Immediately, he looked at the location of the nuclear power plant in the distance. It should be. That's it? However, when Munan was about to take steps to leave with the 4 people around him, in the direction from which they came, a man with tattered clothes walked out of there. Munan's eyes instantly noticed the other party's clothes and aura. The clothes were severely damaged, with obvious time deposits, and the breath was very unstable. It should have been forcibly restored with the help of foreign objects after being seriously injured. Moreover, although most of the skin seemed to have just shed, there was still some residue left. A smell of body decay. Dabai, Fatty shouted. The 3 of them had a look of surprise on their faces. They didn't expect that Subai would come into their sight like this at this time. Are you Subai? I've heard of your name. Munan smiled at Subai and prepared to leave around Subai. However, Subai turned his head at this moment and looked at Munan. "Let me see how long you can keep pretending." As soon as he finished speaking, Subai reached out and grabbed Munan's shoulder. Munan subconsciously took a step back to the side, but Subai's fingers had grabbed the opponent's shoulder hard before. A piece of human skin was torn off by Subai. After this piece of human skin was torn off, Munan's shoulders were exposed with smooth and tender skin similar to that of a woman. "Pretend." There was a solemn look in the monk's eyes. Since this disguise technique even imitated the breath of others, how could he have misjudged it just now? He. The only woman among the 4 people on Munan's side came out. The skin on her body began to fall off, revealing rotten flesh. The originally delicate and pretty face turned into the face of an extremely ferocious man. His eyes were fixed on Subai. Originally, I was still a little unsure. The real Munan's voice became very hoarse because his body organs are basically in a semi-necrotic state now. However, what you did just now confirmed my previous suspicion. You are still too careless. A hoarse and intermittent voice came out of Munan's mouth at this time, with the aura of a dying person. "Oh, are you careless?" "Maybe," Subai shrugged nonchalantly, "but I don't intend to let you leave alive." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 552. Munan grinned. He barely had a few teeth left. He shook his head helplessly and said to himself, "It seems that things are more interesting than I thought." "Yes, it is indeed interesting." Subai glanced at Munan. "Besides, you don't have to force yourself to be calm at this time. So, what you are saying is that in the face of absolute power, any strategies and calculations are pale and powerless." Munan's 2 eyes in the pile of rotten flesh stared at Subai. The 4 people around Munan also took a step forward. Their meaning was obvious: they would not let Munan die. Correspondingly, the fat man, Gyatso, and the monk also took 2 steps forward. Due to emotions and reasons, they should all stand next to Subai's pillow. What's more, they are not stupid people. From the conversation just now, it seems that he also heard something. Subai should know some secrets of this story world. Therefore, in addition to the original relationship between emotion and reason, another aspect is added to benefit. Munan said, "Is it really necessary that you have to kill me at this time? Why do I always feel that something is wrong? There seems to be something wrong somewhere. Were you and I the only 2 people in that nuclear power plant?" Subai did not answer. Faced with such a person, the longer you hang around with him, the more you will get into his rhythm. The best way is to kill him while he is sick. If you kill him while he is injured by radiation, then his wisdom, his layout, and his plan will no longer be of much use. As for whether he was plotted by another person, Subai no longer planned to take care of it. The person in front of him had already been confirmed by his own eyes. The threat was the most terrifying. "Walk." After Munan said such a word, the woman who had pretended to be him grabbed his shoulders directly. The 2 of them quickly retreated, while the other 3 stood in the middle to block him. It can be seen from the scene that these 4 listeners really regard Munan as their leader. Even Subai is somewhat puzzled. What is there about this Munan that is mysterious and can really be conquered? Do listeners of the same level treat you as your little brothers? Subai rushed forward, trying to bypass the 3 people and chase Munan directly. The others except Munan were passers-by A and B in Subai's eyes. When the 3 people tried to intercept Subai, the monk, the fat man and Gyatso took action together and stopped one of them respectively. Although they are still puzzled by Subai's insistence on killing Munan, this does not prevent them from cooperating with Subai. The woman was very fast, but Subai's speed was even faster. Compared with the short-term explosive power, Subai really didn't fear anyone. Coupled with the cooperation of Fatty and the others, Subai didn't encounter any resistance and went straight after him. Go up. The escape route of the woman and Munan was directly towards the nuclear power plant. Damn. This guy actually saw through the essence of the story world again. How did he do it? Moreover, Subai actually has another confusion, that is, since Munan has died in the first reincarnation, he can only sense his fire suit because he did not die the first time, so what about Munan? How did he find his firefighting uniform so easily and dig a hole for others so that Gyatso and the others would die by mistake? For a moment, the fat man's fearful look towards Munan appeared in Subai's mind. Sometimes. I really have to admit that some people are indeed too smart. He's faster than me and I can't get rid of him. The woman said to Munan beside her. Then you stop him. I'll go to the nuclear power plant. It doesn't matter if I die. You will all be resurrected in the next reincarnation, but you must let me succeed once. Just once, our team will have the advantage forever. Can you? Okay. What the woman asked was not whether what Munan said would come true. In fact, she had never worried about this issue. Compared to the combination of Fatty Subai and the four of them, Munan's prestige and prestige among them was almost at a monopoly level. What she was worried about was whether Munan could insist on walking to the nuclear power plant with her body in such condition. No problem. The woman immediately let go and gave Munan some strength to move forward, while she turned back and faced Subai directly. Subai hit the woman like a solid lead bullet. Boom. For a time, the two people left a trace of more than 10 meters long on the mountain ravine. The woman's body is very soft. This is Subai's most intuitive feeling, but it also makes Subai feel a little uncomfortable because his momentum seems not to have caused much harm to the woman. The other person's body is as direct as a sponge. Remove your own strength. Next moment. The woman raised her arms, exerted force on her waist, tightened her whole body and rotated, using herself as the axis. She exerted force instantly and threw Subai's whole body out. Boom. Subai's body drew a parabola in the air and hit a rock next to it. Most of the rock cracked under the blow. Holding his slightly heavy chest, Subai slowly stood up. Gwoo. The other party's methods and moves obviously did not have an overwhelming advantage over him, but they still achieved very good results. Every move seemed to be made by nature. The woman also stood up at this time, stretched out her left hand, and a soft sword appeared in her palm. The soft sword made a low trembling sound, which spread far along the wind in the valley. Although the woman was not beautiful, at this time, but he showed the attitude of a worldly master. I can't kill you, but you can't walk past me either. The woman's voice was a little cold, but also carried a strong confidence. Yes, with her ability and strength, it is difficult to kill Subai, because Subai's body has been clearly discovered in the previous contact. It is completely a bug. Among seniors of the same level, it is what kind of pervert has polished his body to this level? Subai smiled, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw Munan walking towards the nuclear power plant gate step by step, and then stared at the woman coldly. That's not possible. I'll see. The woman stood there, seemingly waiting for Subai to attack her. Also, her mission was to stop Subai and create time for Munan, not to have a life or death showdown with Subai here. Subai relaxed his muscles and bones, and strands of cold energy were gathering under his skin. Subai knew that if he fought with such a martial arts master, even if his absolute power had the upper hand, the opponent would be able to rely on his endless strength. The moves and techniques he used to neutralize his own strength advantage, or even use his own strength to gain strength. So, when fighting against someone like this, you have to come up with something that makes her feel uncomfortable. Fortunately, there are quite a lot of things that I can use on myself. Buzz. Subai turned into a blood mist and enveloped the woman directly. The woman did not retreat, let alone dodge, but took a step forward. The soft sword immediately straightened, and sword energy swept out. The blood mist condensed into Sudbai's figure instantly after approaching. Sudbai dodged two sword chi, but the third sword chi pierced his left arm. However, Sudbai's punch also hit directly. A woman. The woman held the soft sword in her left hand. Her wrist trembled slightly. The soft sword bent over and stabbed Sudbai's neck. Her right hand turned into a palm and pushed forward horizontally, intending to neutralize the momentum of Sudbai's punch. The fists of both parties came into contact. At the moment of contact, the woman's eyes froze because to her surprise, Sudbai's fist did not exert much force. Then, a stream of white energy was released from Sudbai's fist. In an instant, the stinging feeling hit the woman's entire arm. She was shocked and retreated quickly. Even the soft sword had no time to continue its attack on Sudbai's neck. Sudbai's body sank, and then he shot towards the woman again, holding the Hellfire shotgun in both hands. An indomitable momentum immediately revealed, and a charming smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The woman immediately closed the veins in her right arm to prevent the cold poison from spreading. She let out a scream in her throat and waved the sword in her left hand, creating a silver barrier in an attempt to resist Sudbai's shot. Just a slight tap of Sudbai's toe during the impact, and the piece of gravel was immediately crushed. As a result, his whole body changed direction, passing directly past the woman and going behind her. In the past, Sudbai couldn't control it so freely, but now, after experiencing 2 nuclear radiation exercises, Sudbai felt that his control over his body and his own power had improved to another level. In a daze, Sudbai suddenly felt that compared with absorbing other people's enhanced abilities, enduring nuclear radiation without dying seemed to be more beneficial to him. After all, he had too many miscellaneous gadgets. When he wanted to improve his strength in the future, he would often a burden. Of course, if there was a reinforcement that was suitable and exciting to him, Sudbai would not be polite. The woman froze on the spot, watching Sudbai rush over from her side. When she turned around to intercept, she found that she was too late. In a fight between masters, even one mistake in one round can often determine the direction of the entire fight. What kind of enhancement is he? The woman cursed in her heart. She was obviously a listener of the melee system, but she could actually use the power of ice. The woman looked at her left arm, which had almost turned purple and white, and was speechless. The gate of the nuclear power plant was right in front of him. Munan dragged his rotten flesh-like body to this place. When he looked back, he found that Sudbai had successfully bypassed his men and rushed here at high speed. Here he comes. English. A voice suddenly came from beside Munan. I know, Munan responded in English. He will kill you, just like the first time and the second time. English. Hearing this, Munan suddenly laughed. Even though he looked really scary when he looked like this, he still smiled. He's very impulsive, but if you're going to think he's stupid, you're wrong. Munan turned around and looked at Sudbai, who was less than 200 meters away from him and was rushing towards him at a high speed. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 553. Sudbai was approaching fiercely, and Munan stood there, watching Sudbai approaching. He was covered in rotten flesh. He lacked the calmness and chicness in Sudbai's impression, and looked a little decadent. However, he stood there with an imposing manner. But he is not inferior at all. This kind of appearance can be called calm. Of course, it can also be called arrogant. Call. A strong gust of wind howled and hit Munan. Munan was seriously injured and extremely weak. As a result, he fell to the ground. It really fits the saying, it will fall when the wind blows. Well. Sighing, Munan seemed a little helpless. As a strong man, when he loses his strength, the sense of gap is often the most tormenting. Compared with this sense of gap, Other things don't seem to matter so much. However, Munan then smiled and said to the invisible person beside him, "Did you see it, English?" There is another thing that Munan didn't say, that is, look, he didn't kill me. Subai stopped in front of Munan, and did not directly hit him and knock him from rotten meat to meat paste. However, the airflow caused by moving from extreme speed to sudden stillness directly knocked Munan down. "Why don't you kill me?" Munan stood up from the ground with difficulty. "You know, I don't have the strength to resist now, nor the ability to be tempted. If you don't kill me now, you will probably die because of me in the future. I won't play a game of repaying a favor with you. Suddenly it occurred to me that I have something to ask you." Subai looked at Munan and said calmly. This matter was what Subai just thought of, and it is very important because it involves a very key point. That is the main task. Although the fat man and the monk are also people with high IQs, they are limited by the erasure of memory and reincarnation. The level of IQ has really surpassed reincarnation. Below, the female warrior is also coming here, and further away, the fat monk Gyatso and 3 other Munan's men are coming here. The female warrior took her time, because she knew that with the current distance between Subai and Munan, if Subai wanted to kill Munan, she would not be able to stop him. Sure enough, curiosity killed the cat. Munan smiled, then waved his hand sadly. "If he doesn't kill me anymore, why don't you come out?" Subai's eyes narrowed. "Don't be nervous, you know this person." Munan smiled at Subai with a hoarse voice. "Actually, you should have noticed it, right? You really surprised me." Subai looked at Munan. "Is this guy's IQ really that high?" Subai knew clearly that Munan's current decline was just because he never had a real chance to gain the upper hand in this story world. His low ebb situation at this time actually had nothing to do with him. This is a kind of momentum, or luck. This has never been on his side. If he can really get the upper hand once, it will be terrible. Even Subai doesn't have much confidence to pull him down again. "It's not a big deal, actually." Munan spread out his hands with bare bones. "Everything should have at least a triangular relationship. If you want to kill me, it will be difficult for me to resist. In the broadcast stories, there are rarely one-sided massacres and plunders. This is a bit too boring for broadcasting. Therefore, in order to increase the readability and sustainability of the story, it is often necessary to add another point on both sides to form a triangular pattern to maintain the most basic a kind of stability. It's a philosophical way of looking at things." "Chinese, you really surprise me." The position behind Munan suddenly became distorted. On the rock wall, a person walked out. Subai did know this person. He was George. An American man who should have lost all his memory at this time. The last time he saw George, he was covered in rotten flesh. He survived the first nuclear explosion just like himself. Now, he has obviously recovered. No, to be precise. It was reset, which means that he did die in the last reincarnation, but now it seems that his memory has not been affected at all. George looked at Subai, then at Munan, and nodded slightly. "We meet again. I'm sorry, I think you need to introduce yourself. Although I can infer from some details of your appearance that there is some inbreeding in your bloodline, I really can't deduce your name." George looked at Munan thoughtfully, and then said to Subai in not very fluent Chinese, "I think we should kill him now and talk about other things. You can speak English. They may not understand Korean and Japanese very well, but they should be able to communicate normally in English." Munan seemed more and more calm at this time, because as Subai did not kill, the female warrior had already left. He came over and stood beside him very calmly. In the distance, 3 of his subordinates have also come over. The monk and the others also stood half a step behind Subai. Obviously, they had many things to ask Subai, but now was indeed not the time to chat. Subai noticed that George's left eye was a little red. Although it had been treated, some stains could still be seen vaguely around the eye socket. The eye of the dark demon is not that bead. Subai finally understood why George appeared here. Before, Subai had been wondering about one thing, that is, what is the main mission? When were the main quests announced? It should have been promulgated when everyone truly entered the story world for the first time. So, although he did not die during his first reincarnation, his memory was completely erased. Subai did not know what the main mission was. But there is one person who knows, and that is George, who, like Subai, survived the first reincarnation without dying and also relied on the so-called Eye of the Dark Demon to preserve his memory. In other words, when I met George under the cylindrical building at the end of the second reincarnation, I could at least be sure that George at that time knew the main mission. However, Subai couldn't understand George's choices and actions. He seemed to be simply immersed in absorbing reinforcements from others and did nothing about the main mission. And this was what puzzled Subai the most. George slowly squatted down and sat on the ground in an awkward manner. Munan also sat down. He was really exhausted and exhausted. Subai stood there, looking down at the two people. Just the three of us. I won't add the rest of the teams, groups, or individuals, otherwise we won't even have a mouthful of thicker broth. George stretched and said, in these calm words, it almost sentenced everyone in the audience to death except Subai, Munan and George's own team. I need you two to tell me the matter again, Munan said to George and Subai. After all, even if you make the deduction to the extreme, it is far less than the reality seen with your own eyes. Okay, everyone else, just stay away first, if you believe the three of us in your team, George said with a smile. Munan waved his hand. All four of his men retreated a distance to ensure that they would not participate in or interfere with the conversation below. The fat man, the monk, and Gyatso looked at each other for a moment, without saying anything, and stepped back a distance. After he stood still, the monk smacked his mouth in worry. Why is it like a meeting of gangsters? It's really similar, Gyatso agreed. But the monk is most worried about Subai. The monk took a deep breath and exhaled heavily, showing that even the monk was not very calm at this time. It's not that I'm worried about Subai's ability, or Subai's wisdom, I'm just worried that if something goes wrong during the negotiations over there, someone will be unable to restrain his temper and flip the table. In the distance, two people appeared. One was Stephen, who was covered in rotten flesh, and the other was Mikiri. The two people were also standing far away. Stephen's left eye socket was wrapped with a layer of gauze. Yinhong's blood soaked out. George first told about the first reincarnation and the second reincarnation. Haha, in the second reincarnation, he and I were deceived by you with the fake eye of the dark demon. It was normal. Who knew that your eye of the dark demon was really an eye that could be put into the eye socket? You should have sent the eye of the dark demon into Stephen's eyes before Subai and I entered the circular building in the second reincarnation, and this time in the third reincarnation, you found Stephen when, dug out his eyes, then dug out his own eyes again and put the eye of the dark demon in it. Interestingly, just like a USB flash drive, you can plug it in and use it, and your teammates are just inherited molds. Munan said. The eye of the dark demon is my natural weapon. Only I can use it and no one else can read it. George looked at Subai, but obviously, there is someone here who has found a way to preserve memory. I heard it is said that powerful vampires can store their own memories in their blood. Subai didn't say anything, so he acquiesced. Next, let's talk about the main task, which can make you hesitate and waver between absorbing the benefits and temptations strengthened by veterans and the main task. Obviously, this main task makes you feel very tricky, even very difficult. No clue. Moreover, the latter may be greater, because the goal of the main mission should not be to solve a specific object, otherwise you can be confident that after devouring all other listeners, you will be strengthened and your strength will be greatly increased to single-handedly challenge the gatekeeper boss to complete the mission. And the reason why you couldn't help but appear next to me when he wanted to kill me was because you thought that my wisdom should be helpful to the main mission, right? Munan looked at George and said. At the same time, Munan's small eyes hidden in the rotten flesh showed a glimmer of excitement, as if a mathematical genius encountered a world problem, which inspired more excitement and excitement. Can't wait. George nodded sincerely, you are right. Main mission, prevent nuclear leakage from happening. As for the first reincarnation and the second reincarnation, I didn't have any clue at all, so I decided to hold off on devouring it and wanted to hear your opinions. Munan reached out and tapped his head lightly. According to my confidence in myself, I think that during my first reincarnation, I should have thought of a way to complete the main mission. At least, I should have figured out some of the clues. I am very confident about this. Immediately, Munan shrugged again. However, just through your description, it is difficult to get as much value as I can get from my personal experience, because it is very likely that the truth is hidden in some inconspicuous details. What you said is nonsense. George shook his head and said, don't you have any specific or useful information? After hearing this, Munan was silent for a while, and then asked, I died directly in the first reincarnation, right? Yes. Did I really fight with him in front of you? Munan pointed at Subai and asked. Yes. But in the second reincarnation, he and I didn't fight each other to death. Don't you think it's strange? Yes, George confirmed again. The key to the problem is actually right here. The clue to the main mission lies in why he had to kill me in the first reincarnation. Munan looked at Subai and said firmly. Because he is mentally ill. The fat man who was using a small eavesdropping formation to eavesdrop on the conversation in the distance couldn't help but murmured softly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 554. I don't know. Anyway, after the first mass killing, there were only 3 of us left. Just when I thought we should have started strengthening, absorbing, and enjoying the wonderful moment, the 2 of you suddenly started fighting. And it's not the kind of inexplicable fight you had during the second reincarnation. I know through the eyes of the dark demon that after Mikari and I left, the 2 of you quickly and tacitly attacked Stephen in an attempt to get him. The fake eye of the dark demon, it's a pity that the eye of the dark demon is in his eye socket. What you snatched is just a fake one. But in the first reincarnation, you personally bit his neck to pieces and sucked his blood. George pointed at Subai and said. Actually, this story world seems to be a reincarnation game, but it's actually different. Subai, who had been silently listening to George and Munan's conversation before, said now. Well, what do you think? Munan looked at Subai with interest. If time is a line, then reincarnation is a circle. Subai began to say, but our reincarnation is not actually a reincarnation at all. It is similar to a very popular reincarnation horror movie called Horror Cruise. That kind of thing is obviously an unsolvable reincarnation model. It can take into account all the reactions of the protagonist and even the reverse reactions after realizing that this is reincarnation. The result is that every time the protagonist struggles or even, it was self-destruction, and in the end it became a plot that was planned and arranged in reincarnation. I have experienced a similar reincarnation mode in the story world before, but that kind of reincarnation completely erases everything and resets it. In terms of mode, it is a level lower than Terror Cruise. And now, the 3 of us have our own ability to see through the nature of this reincarnation and bring our memories into the next reincarnation. So, after all, we are too powerful, so powerful that this reincarnation can no longer control us. No matter how much fun you have, it is still the essence of this story world. In fact, it is not reincarnation for the sake of reincarnation. Just as we can't help but want to plunder the reinforcement of others, the reincarnation of this story world, if nothing else, should be accompanied by its subjective consciousness. You mean, that black ball has self-awareness? George asked. In fact, George himself had made this guess, because if you want to find an entry point to complete the main mission in this story world, then, first of all, finding the boss in this story world is the first priority. Just like most games, if you want to pass the level, you must solve the boss guarding the level. However, in this story world, it is difficult to find other threatening objects. The only target is the black ball. By chance, a stone can become a spirit after a long period of time. Why can't it become a core? Among the various energy systems that humans now recognize, the nucleus is the most mysterious and powerful link. Sometimes, when a nuclear leak occurs or there is a problem in some aspect, the media and the public will focus on what they believe to be operational errors or negligence on these issues. But what if the core has self-awareness? Subai expressed his opinion. So, according to you, why does the core in this story world undergo this kind of reincarnation? George looked at Subai and asked. Obviously, he felt that Subai's guess was very possible, but for the core based on his subjective evaluation, George felt it was still a little too ridiculous. Learn, imitate, evolve. Munan's eyes suddenly released a flash of light. Yes, that should be the case. It has actually been observing us, learning from us, and imitating us. This is a manifestation of a new ignorant creature that is progressing from a lower level of intelligence to a higher level of intelligence. The core is so terrifying, how can it still be at a lower level of intelligence? George asked with some confusion. Elephants can easily trample many people to death, but can elephants solve advanced mathematics and discover universal gravity? Munan asked rhetorically. At the same time, the so-called absorption, I think, should be the sweetness given by the core. Dates, because of this sweet date, we will kill each other, we will compete with each other, and we will be able to show more of ourselves. Just like tourists on the beach deliberately throw a handful among the seagulls in order to watch the seagulls snatch food. Cookies. Munan stood up with great difficulty, staring at the nuclear power plant. Is there a way to crack it? George asked. You have eaten meat, but I haven't eaten a bite of meat, Munan said sarcastically. Haha, if we continue to eat this meat, the greater the chance we will be killed in the end, George reminded. I have always believed in the truth that every story world has its own meaning and value. If you cannot obtain enough benefits and progress in a story world, even if you survive in the end, it is equivalent to a failure. After several consecutive attempts, completely widened the gap with the larger army. In the end, it was still a word of death, but it was different sooner or later. However, there is one thing I agree with. This meat can no longer be eaten casually. Can choose to eat. I will lead my people to intercept them at the gate of the nuclear power plant. You too can lead your own people to gather the rest of the audience scattered around. Select the valuable ones among them. If they are really worthless, you can kill them. It can also be used as an appetizer plate at that time. This feels like the politics of a great power, George joked. Indeed, the three of them. The three teams representing three people behind each set a tone here, and there were many other listeners scattered in the county or in the woods. They did not participate in this meeting, and even had the right to know. None, but then, they must accept this order and obediently come to the door of the nuclear power plant and wait together. Because these three teams are almost enough to sweep away the rest of the audience, unless the rest of the audience are closely united at once, but this is obviously impossible. This is where strength dominates everything, and it has nothing to do with national hegemony. The difference. Okay, I agree. Subai reached out and patted Munan on the shoulder. Seeing that George had already nodded and turned around to lead his people away to find other audiences, Subai lowered his voice and asked, "Good performance." Why? Munan looked at Subai with some surprise, but there was a hint of recognition and a kind of teasing in his eyes. I have often seen your enhancements in A and V before. Those long disgusting tentacles have terrible regeneration and repair abilities. They don't even have to be vampires. I don't believe in your wisdom. He hasn't regained his strength yet, and his weak performance just now was really eye-catching. Life is like a play, it all depends on acting. Munan stared at Sudbai's eyes seriously. Do you know why I asked you to find other audiences? Sudbai paused in his heart, but his face remained unmoved, looking a little incomprehensible. It's good that everyone knows. Munan, in turn, stretched out his hand and patted Sudbai on the shoulder. Everyone has their own secrets, and they also want to hide their trump cards at all times, but in short, I hope you are here. There can be a breakthrough. What about you? Sudbai asked back. If you didn't have a plan and an idea, you wouldn't be able to gather the audience again. There is indeed a way, but it's a stupid way. I hope you can bring me some hope, at least reduce the pressure. Munan laughed softly, and while smiling, it seemed that every pore on his body was growing. Tiny red tentacles appeared, and then his body began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. Sudbai turned around and walked towards Fatty and the others. Did you hear everything? Sudbai asked. The fat man nodded. Although there was a meeting between three people before, no one set up any barriers, so although the distance was a bit far, the three parties could actually hear it. It was considered a tacit understanding. Dabai, where are we going now? Looking for an audience, the fat man asked. No, there is a place. I want to go there first. When he said this, Sudbai subconsciously touched the back of his head. That damn old woman did not appear this time. In less than half a day, Sudbai and the others came to the county town again and stood in front of a residential house. This residential building was where Fatty and the others placed Sudbai at the beginning of Sudbai's last reincarnation. Sudbai opened the door and went directly to the second floor. Sudbai opened the door of the westmost room. The furnishings inside had not changed much, a simple bed, and a simple wardrobe. Fat man, monk, please pay attention, Sudbai reminded. The monk and the fat man both nodded. Sudbai walked to the closet, stretched out his hand, and opened the closet. Click. A female corpse fell down directly and fell into Sudbai's arms. There is no corpse transformation. There is indeed no corpse transformation. A female corpse whose throat was cut had been embalmed from top to bottom. If Sudbai hadn't turned his back to the female corpse last time and made the old woman's face her, the female corpse might not have transformed into a corpse. Brothers, look for this family and look up and down. We need the identity of this family. Sudbai pushed the female corpse back to its original position and said, all the other corpses in the county have disappeared, but why is this corpse the only one left? The fat monk and Gyatso immediately started searching. At this time, they didn't think there was anything wrong with Sudbai giving orders, because after all, Sudbai had the advantage in information control. Soon, the fat man came out with a document bag and an identity tag in his hand. He showed it to the monk before, and the monk knew some Korean and translated the words on it to the fat man. Dabai, the head of this family is Jin Honggayu, and he is the chief engineer of the nuclear power plant. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 555. Jin's Honggayu, Sudbai silently read his name. Do you have a family photo? Have. Gyatso walked in at this time. It's interesting. I found this in the mezzanine of the bedroom. Do all Koreans have this habit? With that said, Gyatso handed over an oil paper package. Sudbai opened the oil paper package, and inside there was a family portrait. It was a very ordinary family portrait, with no ghosts or faces, just 4 people. An old woman, a middle-aged man, a middle-aged woman, and a child. A very clear and obvious pattern of a 3-generation family. However, Sudbai immediately pointed at the face of the person in the photo with his hand. This old woman is the key to the problem. At the beginning of the second reincarnation, she appeared at the back of my head. This old woman, Fatty muttered, when did she get on the back of your head? This is a method of possession by ghosts, and it is a very clever method. It can be regarded as using the technique in resurrection to survive. Obviously, the fat man and the monk must be much better at studying ghosts and gods than Subai. Did she possess you while you were asleep due to radiation injuries, or after you woke up? The monk asked. I don't know, what's the difference? Subai asked. There's a big difference. Fatty took over the words. If you are in a coma, according to Taoism, the light on your body is basically half extinguished, that is, there is still some fire light on the wick, but it is not burning at all. Well, at this time, any lonely ghost can try to resurrect you as long as he has ambitions and pursuits. But if you were awake at that time, no matter how seriously injured you were, no matter how weak you were awake, you were Subai, you were a senior listener, your life level was here. Ordinary. The difficulty of a ghost trying to borrow a corpse from you is as difficult as a otaku saying he wants to climb Mount Everest. You must know that wild ghosts have no foundation and are incorporeal things. They are not like listeners of the same level. If a listener of the same level wants to take over the body according to you, it is still possible, but for wild ghosts, it is basically impossible. And according to your statement, this wild ghost still uses the method of turning your head upside down to resurrect your body, which is even more incomprehensible to me. Dabai, tell me how you forced her out of you, the monk said. Subai pointed to the wardrobe next to him. Have you seen this mirror? The mirror was broken. I took out a long piece of glass and stabbed it directly into my mouth. Hiss. The fat man took a breath. Damn. Only a ruthless person like you would dare to do such a thing to yourself. The monk frowned. Actually, it's easy to understand, Gyatso said at this time. This means that the level of the old woman's soul is not high. So, under the premise that the soul level is not high, I almost took away Dabai in such a high-end and classy way. The fat man pondered for a moment after saying this. In an instant, the four people looked at each other. She has nuclear connections. The four of them said in unison. This is the only possibility. The ghost of this old woman must be related to the nuclear. This is the home of the nuclear. The old woman may not be the nuclear, but this is half of her home, so she can show an extremely powerful method at the same time. But it also reflects a level of strength that is not very high. The emergence of any paradox must be supported by a strong reason. Things are interesting. The fat man rubbed his fat chin. We have all seen the other corpses, and they should all be floating in the different dimensions of the nuclear power plant, but this woman's corpse is still here. Plus the weirdness of the old woman's dead soul thing. It's getting more and more interesting. Dabai, I think we may have found a breakthrough. If we continue to follow this clue, we don't need to go to Toriyama Minami. You don't know, Fatty, I feel guilty every time I see that guy. Murmur. Subai thought for a while, but did not tell the fat man that Munan had actually discovered some clues. In fact, Munan also hoped that he could help him find a new breakthrough and relieve the pressure. Admittedly, Subai did understand Fatty's feelings about Munan. In fact, Subai himself was the same. That guy was incredibly smart, and his IQ was really astonishing. The monk seemed very calm and said, Amitba, one drink and one peck have God's will. It should be common sense to take it in and release it. God is jealous of talented people, and this has always been the case since ancient times. Munan is indeed smarter than the demon, but according to the poor monk's understanding of him, he is not really much better than us. To a certain extent, the four of us present can basically be on the same level as him. Otherwise, he would not have been killed by Dabai in the first reincarnation, otherwise, he would not have been destroyed by Dabai in the second reincarnation. Haha, what you said, monk, is quite damaging. You mean that guy is extremely smart, but his luck has always been bad, right? Yes, the monk nodded. To confront or cooperate with such a person, you only need to ensure one thing. Then try your best to prevent him from gaining the upper hand. As long as he fails to gain the upper hand, then, no matter how much wisdom he has, he can only sigh like Joe Yu. Okay, let's get back to business first. Gyatso reminded everyone who was a little off topic, there is no other information at home. If you want to know the identity of this old woman, you even want to figure out the nuclear leakage and the so-called, do you have any ideas on how to deal with and solve the nuclear issue? The idea is still in the nuclear power plant, Subai said, but instead of going to the cylindrical building that time, we should go to other office buildings in the nuclear power plant to find employee information. Although there are many low-level employees in the nuclear power plant, since Jin's Honggayu, the monk's translator, is the chief engineer, he should be easy to find. Then we need Munan's cooperation, Fatty mused. We must prevent others from entering the cylindrical building when we go to another office building to search for file information. I think the introduction of the black ball explosion should start when the audience enters the core area, because in the two reincarnations, the time period for everyone to enter the core area is different, but after the first batch of people entered, it was just the time black ball that can complete absorbing the reinforcement of a dead audience will explode. This note is actually here. It seems that Munan first led his own people to block the gate of the nuclear power plant, and then asked George and our two teams to search for other listeners or teams who were alone. Doesn't this mean that he had already arranged this move? Gyatso suddenly felt a little ridiculous. Don't tell me that guy is really that smart. In fact, it is really possible. He should have judged the real usefulness of the nuclear power plant, not just the cylindrical building. He should also have analyzed the opportunity and time positioning of the black ball explosion and reincarnation, so that's why there will be such an arrangement. The fat man clapped his hands. One thing to say, this guy is indeed smart, but as the monk said, this guy is too smart and is jealous of God. He is destined to become a stepping stone for others to achieve success in the future. In fact, when it comes to comparing luck and luck, no one should compare with Dabai. Damn it, every time I see Dabai, I feel twisted in my heart. Fatty, I have worked hard and endured humiliation and hardship to get to where I am today, and then when I turned around, I saw that a guy who often suffered from mental illness was also the same. Evil people must be punished by evil people. In the first reincarnation, Dabai killed Munan, which is the best proof. The monk opened the door to the room. Let's go back to the nuclear power plant first. We'd better get some things done early. It's clear enough, even if you continue to kill some listeners to absorb their reinforcements according to what you, George and Munan said, Dabai, we have to wait until the matter is investigated and everything is under control. The monk walked first and went down the stairs, followed by Fatty Gyatso and Subai. When the four of them walked out of the small courtyard and stood on the side of the road, Subai suddenly remembered something and said, it's really strange. Who among you decided to temporarily place me in this room? It's a bit too coincidental. Oh, I forgot. You have experienced reincarnation, so your memory must be gone. No one can answer this question for me. Suddenly, the monk's face suddenly became very serious, and he immediately said, Dabai, you said before that you were lying in a vampire coffin in a prop shop. Where is the prop shop? When Subai heard this, he looked around, and then said with some confusion, hey, it's not this street. Half of this county is close to the sea. It is a small peninsula. I have an impression of that prop shop. It was entered from the hillside road where we thought it was the first time we entered the story world. County streets, these two streets are close to the sea and look very similar, but in fact they are located in the south and north directions of the county, separated by the entire county, Gyatso said. Then, that's not right, Dabai, the fat man said. You said that we sent you to the bed in this room after you fell into the sea water and fell unconscious from the prop shop, and then I arranged a magic circle for you. Stay here to cultivate. Why should we send you from one end of the county to a house all the way over? The fat man shrugged. That doesn't make sense, and according to what you said, we didn't notice anything strange about this house at the time. So, the poor monk thinks, Dabai, the real experience is that you may not have been unconscious at the time, but were. At this point, the monk seemed to be hesitant, paused, and continued, it should be you, Dabai. In the last reincarnation, the three of us were brought to this room. Xiaolong is here to say hello to everyone and thank you all for the recent rewards to Xiaolong. There will be another chapter tonight, but it is estimated to be around 2:30 in the morning. Chapter 4 will be released tomorrow. Don't panic, hold on tight to Dragon. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Xiaolong. Chapter 556. Subai pointed at himself, you mean, I was already possessed at that time? Or, my consciousness was already controlled? But, this poor monk thinks it should be like this. When you jumped into the sea, Dabai, you briefly passed out, and the old woman who invaded your body with the back of her head took control of your body. Since this old woman can be threatened by the formation arranged by the fat man, and can also be forced out of the body by you using glass, it can be seen that she is indeed a revenant who is not very strong but has the home field advantage. During the short period of time she controlled you, because there happened to be three of us around you at that time, the old woman did not dare to do anything and tried to hide herself. At that time, you were a little crazy. You said that you used it for a long time. It took time to remember who she was, so if the old woman wanted to imitate you at that time, it was actually very simple. It was not impossible to just stumble and point, from one end of the county to this end. And according to the situation at that time, the three poor monks will definitely only follow you. After you enter this room, the old lady may find that there is really no way to get rid of the three poor monks, and because she controls your body, she will also follow you. You are indeed tired, so I give you control of your body. But it was obvious that this old lady wanted to go home and have a look. Go home, Subai smiled a little, she can come back at any time. Perhaps, she really wants a body, and Subai, you just meet the requirements. The fat man analyzed with a serious face at first, then showed a mean smile that all men know, and said, for example, that old lady wanted to change into a man's body and experience what it feels like to masturbate. Dabai, there is something you can tell us bluntly. Although when you described what happened before, you should have deliberately ignored this detail to take care of our feelings. The monk paused and continued, that is, the three of us probably gave up on you when we saw you seriously injured in the last reincarnation, right? Subai was silent for a while, then nodded. I have to say that this is indeed embarrassing. Not only Subai feels embarrassed, but Fatty, Gyatso and the monk are also embarrassed. However, when analyzing the problem, you must tell the truth and not play with lies. But, that can be explained. If we just saw you for the first time, and then you fainted, the three of us rescued you and placed you on the bed. With the three of us understanding your bloodline, we shouldn't give up so quickly. Because we all know that from the perspective of your bloodline, recovery is actually not too difficult for you. It only requires the three of us to create some suitable external conditions for you. But the three of us basically gave up on you after you woke up, as you said. Even if Fatty arranged a so-called defensive formation for you, everyone knew it in their hearts and it was already a kind of parting ways. What prompted us to give up on you so quickly? The monk finally asked. The poor monk thinks that the old woman should have controlled your body when you were unconscious, and then when she stumbled and even went crazy, she led us from one end of the county to here. Throughout the process, the three of us, the poor monk, Gyatso, and the fat man, felt from various details that you, Subai, were really seriously affected by the radiation, and even some of your consciousness and conditioning were unclear. Subai rubbed his temples heavily with his hands, forcing himself to concentrate again. So, that old woman, why? Are you really just here to go home and have a look? Subai naturally ignored the fat man's teasing reason. This poor monk doesn't know either, but he feels that we have already caught the tail of the nuclear leakage and all the other things. Next, let's see if we have the ability to drag out the tail and lead the guys inside. The entrance to the nuclear power plant seems very busy now. Of course, it is not a bustling place with a lot of people. On the contrary, it seems very quiet here. Although there are a lot of people, the occasional exchanges or conversations are mainly in low-pitched whispers. Munan and 4 of his subordinates were sitting under the gate of the nuclear power plant. The 5 of them really had the aura of one man being in control and not letting others get away. Of course, in front of the 5 of them, there was a human head placed on the ground. This was a German audience member who was trying to lead other audience members to clamor to enter the nuclear power plant gate. As a result, 3 of Munan's subordinates attacked and killed him directly, each of them suffering some injuries. This move can be regarded as shocking the approximately 15 or 16 audience members below. In fact, if these listeners can unite and rush forward together, the 5 people of Munan will definitely be overthrown, but no one wants to be the first bird anymore, and no one dares to be the first bird anymore. Everyone is at this moment played like an ostrich. Although the audience below basically doesn't know about reincarnation, everyone knows that the core area of this story world is in this nuclear power plant. Therefore, most people think that it is these 5 Chinese people who wanted to reap some of the benefits. All the rotten flesh on Munan's body has disappeared. Why is there only one head left in front of the German audience? Because his entire body has been decomposed and absorbed by Munan. Unlike Subai's bloodline, which absorbs blood and transforms its own power, Munan's absorption focuses on the skin, flesh, and bones, but at least in terms of effect, it does not seem to be much worse than Subai. But that tentacle with only thick body fluids definitely does not have the elegance of a vampire. Munan was holding a branch in his hand and paddling it casually on the ground. 4 of his subordinates were sitting around him, basically closing their eyes and concentrating. After a while, there were some disturbances in the audience circle below again, and another group of listeners came over. It was George, and a Japanese audience member who was almost semi-escorted. George took Stephen and Mikari straight to the gate of the nuclear power plant. The audience below thought that the Americans could not sit still and planned to force their way through. For a moment, everyone's minds became agitated again. I was thinking that if the Americans took action against the Chinese who were blocking the door, could I join in and join in? But, soon, the cold facts poured down like a basin of cold water. The 3 Americans nodded to the Chinese people and said hello. Then they sat down with the Chinese people with their backs to the nuclear power plant gate and all the audience below. They are actually in the same group. For a time, a sense of powerlessness and frustration was fermenting in the hearts of everyone. The audience were all smart people. Although they were very aware of current affairs, they were also able to adapt to the situation and choose the best and safest behavior for themselves. But they are also a kind of proud people. In the eyes of ordinary people, they are gods, and basically every audience will be affected by this mentality to a greater or lesser extent. Therefore, if the 5 Chinese people sitting there could be said to have intimidated everyone with their momentum and fierce methods before, then now, the posture of 3 Americans sitting there majestically, then there was no superimposed effect at all, but instead it suddenly intensified everyone's rebellious psychology. Because this shows that these 2 teams actually have the idea of besieging the bid. They want to rely directly on their strength and regardless of appearances, to grab everything in the story world this time. Humans are such strange creatures, because humans have complex psychological activities and changes that are far beyond the understanding of ordinary animals. Below, the audience, who were originally individual visitors, had begun to sit together silently. People who had not originally planned to form a team also began to form a team. The audience who had formed a team before became closer at this time. Although no one has yet stood up to take the lead in resistance, the atmosphere below is becoming more and more solemn. "You shouldn't have sat over here," Munan said calmly to George, who was sitting next to him. "If you sit down below, they won't act rashly, because at that time, you were one of them, even a weather vane. Your team sitting below won't move, and the rest of them don't dare to move. It doesn't matter, sooner or later we're going to have a falling out anyway." George looked very indifferent. Munan nodded. He was not overly nervous, because not far away, he saw Subai and the three people walking towards here. Three powerful teams are sitting here, which is enough to scare all the loose sand below. The courage that the people below have just gathered will be completely defeated, and they will change from lions waiting to awaken to egoism first. Small suffering. By the way, your friend's name is Stephen. Munan took the branch in his hand and pointed casually at Stephen, who was sitting next to George. This guy was a fusion of werewolf and bearman, two orc-enhanced guys. He was quite strong, but now this guy looked rather miserable. After all, having endured the trauma of nuclear radiation, it was not like he could recover as quickly as the man named Subai. "What's wrong?" George asked. "No, it's just a little strange. It's actually quite muggy today." "Why does your friend still have long hair covering the whole back of his head? Is he a Beatles fan?" "That's just his habit," George laughed, but the ring finger of his right hand trembled suddenly. Oh, Munan nodded noncommittally, then stood up and looked at Subai and others who were walking over. He opened his arms and faced Subai. "I suddenly feel that in this story world, my compatriots are the most trustworthy. And what helps me the most?" Subai stopped and did not greet Munan's hug. He just said in a slightly teasing tone, "Fat man, let me ask you a question. What was the first thing you thought of when you saw those long, disgusting red tentacles?" "MVSD-. Fatty is also a role model for veteran drivers. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 557. The four of them, Subai, walked directly into the nuclear power plant. However, the four of them did not walk towards the cylindrical position, but towards the office building. At the same time, they naturally did not choose to circle around to enter the real land. Everyone was very excited. Tacitly, there was no chance of the black ball exploding, because there were other things that needed to be done now. George kept watching the actions of Subai and the four people inside, and said with some surprise, "Are you so trusting of them?" Obviously, George didn't know about the tacit understanding between Subai and Munan, but now he could see some clues. Munan was sitting here with four of his audience members, and he was blocking not only the audience below, but also George. George was also very afraid of this Chinese man whose intelligence was almost demonic. Haha, Munan laughed twice and did not answer, but his eyes glanced at Stephen twice. Chinese people's nationalism and patriotism suddenly awakened at this time, George asked, with a little bit of irony in his words. In a precise sense, the three parties have never reached a real agreement at all. They are more wary than cooperative with each other. Munan exhaled and stood up from the ground. All the audience below were alert to Munan's movements. When they saw him standing up, everyone almost held their breath. "Look below," Munan pointed to the audience below. "Does it look like the Eight-Nation Alliance army?" "George. The electronic equipment is out of order and must not be used." The monk looked around the office building and said, "Fat man, go check the employee list in the hall and see if there is Jin's Honggayu's name." Dabai, Gyatso, and the three of us went to each floor separately to search. Since Jin's Honggayu is the chief engineer, he must have his own independent office. The four of them separated in the office building. Sudbai went directly to the 6th floor and started to search. Although Sudbai didn't know Korean, there was a label at the door of each office, marking who owned the office, so basically just take Jin's Honggayu's Korean hand gestures and compare them to search. There was no room on the 6th floor. Sudbai went up to the 7th floor. The decoration pattern of the 7th floor was obviously a level higher than that of the previous floors. The aisles were also covered with a dark blue carpet and there were many potted plants around them. The flowers have withered, and there are even special ink paintings on the walls. In the entire East Asian cultural circle, the division of identity and status is very obvious. Of course, even Westerners who label themselves as democratic countries are actually divided into 3, 6, and 9 grades, but it is more hidden. Sudbai started searching carefully, and finally saw the name on the label on the door of an office matching that of Jin's Honggayu. Sudbai did not rush to open the door and go in to check. Instead, he held his shoulders and walked back, leaning against the wall and waiting for the monk and the others to finish their search and arrive at his location. Electronic communication equipment is naturally unavailable here, so communication is naturally slow. He reached out and rubbed the area between his eyebrows. The old woman's face vaguely appeared in Sudbai's mind. The wounds on the female corpse's neck were also so obvious. If nothing else happens, the relationship between the old woman and the female corpse should be that of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. The female corpse did not transform into a corpse originally, but she suddenly transformed into a corpse because she saw the old woman's face on the back of her head. This is a bit like an old man who was originally very gentle. He was very kind to his neighbors and fellow villagers, and was active in paving roads and building bridges. You don't expect anything in return for your participation, but one day you suddenly see the enemy who raped and killed your daughter appear in the village. No matter how elegant or gentle this old man is, he will probably turn into a murderous devil in an instant and rush out to kill people with a hatchet. Could it be that the essence of this story world is a very cliché mother-in-law and daughter-in-law problem? Sudbai smiled a little when he thought about it. If this is true, it is indeed in line with the aesthetics of broadcasting, an aesthetic that makes you laugh or cry. But, will the issue of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law affect the leakage of nuclear power plants? Did the old woman really kill her daughter-in-law? In short, this story world has an extremely huge world structure, but it seems to be connected to a small family ethics drama on another line. About 5 minutes later, the monk, the fat man and Gyatso all finished searching their own floors and came to this floor. Seeing Sudbai standing there, the three of them looked at the door opposite. The fat man held the talisman in his left hand and the mahogany sword in his right hand. He was ready. Even the monk held the prayer beads in his hands. Obviously, in a nuclear power plant, anything can happen. Even an ordinary dead soul may have the ability to using unimaginable means. Click. The fat man reached out and pushed open the door. Sudbai and Gyatso stood beside the fat man and the monk respectively, protecting and supporting them. The door opened. The furnishings inside are very elegant and simple. The scrolls on the wall are imitations of the works of a Chinese painter from the Qing dynasty. There is a layer of red carpet underneath. Although there is a lot of dust on the furnishings, it still gives people a sense of place. It has a high-quality feeling, which obviously reflects the appreciation level of the office owner. No problem, the fat man looked at the monk, which also reflected the fat man's caution at this time. The monk nodded, indicating that he didn't find anything unusual here. Immediately afterwards, Gyatso and Sudbai began to search for the files in this office. There was no way to search the files in the brain. Not to mention that the power and network were cut off, and under such high concentration radiation conditions, under the circumstances, even robots specially made of radiation-proof materials will not last long before they fail, let alone these ordinary computers. This kind of search still depends on luck, but fortunately, Sudbai was lucky. He raised a folder in his hand and said, "This doesn't seem to be a work document." There are family photos on it. Among the four, the only one who can speak Korean is the monk. This is a housing report, which is similar to housing allocation in our domestic units. It is a welfare measure. This is an application form. Jin Hongyu is not only the chief engineer of this nuclear power plant, but also has a very high administrative status. I don't really understand the system in South Korea, but judging from some of the information and details on this application form, Jin Hongyu's status is basically that of a person who speaks the truth in this nuclear power plant. In addition, his family relationship is also introduced here. His wife's name is Choi Min-ing, his mother's name is Lee Soo-mi, and his son's name is Kim Hee-bum. Then there's no news worth getting excited about. The fat man scratched his head. Don't waste your work. No, there is still some. Sudbai suddenly said, in this world, there can be no love without reason, and there can be no hatred without reason. In fact, in this story world, it has been very obvious. Jin Zhong's family is definitely inseparable from the nuclear leakage. In fact, now we have the most direct method, which is to find the old woman's soul, and then let the fat man and the monk try to search for the soul. In this way, the truth of the matter will emerge. Who knows where the old woman has gone now? Fatty asked. Also, why didn't the old woman come back to you this time around, Dabai? Gyatso said at this time, it doesn't necessarily mean that old woman. Among the four members of this family, we only saw two people. One is his wife Kui Min-ing, and the other is the old woman Lee Zi-ame. Kui Min-ing is now a corpse, placed in the closet, and embalmed. It is obviously a murder case. Li Xiuying was confirmed to be dead and became a ghost, but she was still wandering around the old house. But there are two other characters. One is Jin Hongyu himself. As the chief engineer of this nuclear power plant, Chi Lu also said that Jin Hongyu also has a high administrative status. If there is an accident or leak at the nuclear power plant, he will be the one to talk about it. It is absolutely impossible that there is no relationship at all. Moreover, based on how his family is treated differently from other families in the county, it is almost certain that Jin Hongyu was probably the real driving force behind the nuclear power plant leak. At the same time, there is also Jin Hongyu's son, Jin Zifan. Dabai, when you had a meeting with George and Munan before, we all heard your content clearly. Munan said something that impressed me very much, and it can even be compared to Jin Zifan. Looking at the photo, Jin Zifan seems to be about 5 or 6 years old. After Gyatso finished speaking, he looked at Sudbai. Sudbai's eyes narrowed. You mean, the guess that Munan said? This core actually relies on this model and reincarnation, is it for learning, imitation, and progress? The fat man immediately clapped his hands and said, yes, yes, we have always regarded the core as a too high-end thing. In fact, if we regard it as a devil or a high-level ghost, there are actually many guesses. With experience and habits, we can apply it to bring the enemy down to a level we are familiar with. Only then can we use our rich experience at this level to understand and defeat the enemy. If the core is compared to the devil's mantle, and a guy inherits this mantle. And this guy is very young and even mentally immature. To the point where he still doesn't really know how to be a person with his own independent consciousness. There is a huge gap between the height of his life level and his own wisdom. What will he do? He will learn instinctively, he will imitate instinctively, and he will instinctively desire to make progress. The fat man took a deep breath, raised his head, and looked at the ceiling. Could it be that he is really just a little devil who organized and controlled all this? As soon as the fat man finished speaking, the office that was originally sealed was suddenly hit by a dark wind. Ambient temperature. It also lowered all of a sudden. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 558. Hiss, do you feel a little colder? Fatty asked with a frown. At the same time, Fatty's finger behind his back gently tickled Monk's side. This was a hint. Fatty knew Monk could understand. The monk stretched out his hand and put it on the fat man's shoulder. The fat man understood and immediately closed his eyes. Immediately afterwards, the monk and the fat man shouted at the same time. A Tai Chi pattern appeared on the fat man's chest, and a Buddhist mark appeared between the monk's eyebrows. Then, the two of them opened their eyes together. Duh! Open! Subai and Gyatso stood aside, providing support and protection. The moment the monk and the fat man opened their eyes, Subai suddenly discovered that there was a child's figure hanging there on the beam, like a bird. Like a gecko, it sticks to the wall. The fat man immediately picked up the talisman, apparently intending to catch ghosts. However, the monk grabbed the fat man's wrist and signaled the fat man not to act rashly. The boy's shadow was walking on the ceiling, showing an extremely strange posture. "Close your eyes!" shouted the monk. However, it was too late, because in an instant, Subai suddenly found that the space he was in had been completely turned upside down. The whole house seemed to be rotating. The bottom where he was suddenly turned into the top, and the whole person immediately became weightless. Below, where the beams and ceiling should have been, became a piece of lava, emitting terrible black flames. Subai subconsciously grabbed a protruding position beside him with one hand to prevent himself from falling. The same goes for the fat man and the monk. Gyatso pulled out his hatchet and stabbed it into the wall to stabilize himself. The boy's shadow walked in the lava, gradually getting further away, with a touch of joy and excitement, as if he was a naughty boy who had just finished school and was getting ready to go home. When the boy's shadow completely disappeared into the depths of the magma also completely disappeared. The misaligned relationship between the ceiling and the floor has also been restored. Caught off guard, all four of them fell to the ground. For a moment, the four people's eyes showed a look of horror. Is this the boat we need to deal with? Fatty spat. How can you play with this when you're paralyzed? Even high-level listeners have to be as cowardly as we are when facing him, right? Yes. The method that the boy's shadow showed before was completely beyond everyone's imagination and understanding. That suddenly turned upside down space. The lava spurts out and you can feel the terrifying hot breath. It really left a deep shadow in everyone's hearts. The other party just came over to take a look, no matter whether he couldn't kill the audience directly, but this feeling, this method, this gesture. It's really shocking enough. The monk sat cross-legged and began to recite sutras. As the sutras were recited, wisps of cool feeling hit everyone's bodies, dispelling other emotions in everyone's hearts and soothing everyone's mood. The fat man gritted his teeth and stood up, looking a little depressed and uninterested. Gyatso also stood up and sighed silently. The monk glanced at everyone, and there was a hint of helplessness in his eyes. Yes, helplessness. The monk can understand everyone's current mood, so why can't he himself? Subai pursed his lips at this time and said, "The broadcast will not arrange necessary games." "Yes, the broadcast will not arrange a fatal situation," Gyatso responded, "but the broadcast can set how many of us must die before the matter ends. For example, out of 10 listeners, after 5 die, the remaining ones complete the task and return to the real world. Broadcasting has indeed designed a story world like this before. Listeners have to fight and stab each other while also dealing with their own dangers in the story world. But for the 4 people here, facing such a situation, they really feel aggrieved. It seems that everything has been arranged, and the previous struggles and explorations have become a kind of useless effort, leaving only the most humble and low-profile pursuit, or begging is more appropriate. That's living. They have been busy, life and death, struggling for so long, and now, they still have to face the world of the story in such a passive way and passive mode. The 4 of them still can't accept it. People. No matter how realistic a person is. Deep down, there is still a hypocritical side. Just like what happened at the train station, the layout of the broadcast appeared after 30 senior listeners died. The fat man shook his head and gritted his teeth. It's different. One thing you should all know is that this world is not real. I'm not talking about this story world. I mean, we are actually all in a fictional environment. This environment is different from fantasy or the spiritual world, but a virtual world with the main axis as the core. It should even be separated from the story world. It's like an online game and the real world. Here, it is not surprising that the boy has this ability, and it is not surprising that the ghost of the old woman has the ability to possess the back of her head. Dabai, you mean, since this is a virtual nuclear energy world, that little boy can take advantage of the home field here, and we can actually turn this place into our home field, Gyatso asked. I think we have entered a misunderstanding. This is what Fatty reminded me before. Why should we think of the nuclear power too high? If it is too high, we will not be able to see it clearly. The difference between looking at the level and looking up is still huge. If we lower its style, then many things will become simpler. Whether it is a nuclear energy world, a fantasy world, or a spiritual world, in short, it is not a real world or a pure story world. There must be details that we have ignored. Subai continued. The monk nodded and looked at the fat man. Fat man, the poor monk suddenly thought of a question. Say the fat man calmed down his emotions and turned around. Since that old woman can use the level of an ordinary revenant to perform methods that even high-level revenants are not qualified or capable of using, what if she is not a special case? The monk frowned, as if he was thinking about the right words to express his inner thoughts. It's like, maybe this illusion has special bonuses to some of the ghost's abilities. When the fat man heard this, a flash of light suddenly bloomed in his eyes, and he immediately said, "Yes, it's very possible, really very possible. If that old woman is really so good to her grandson that they wear a pair of pants, why is she still afraid of my formation when she possesses Bimax?" The fat man seemed to regain his energy all of a sudden and began to pace around the office. Monk, maybe we can really try to use the simplest method to try to solve this complicated problem. For example, the old woman's possession ability can directly create an extra face of her own from the back of the person's head. This kind of domineering the method may be replaceable, and its principle, conversely speaking, may be equivalent to our soul calling. This virtual world of nuclear energy may really have natural conveniences and bonuses for the summoning and entry of souls. Yes, it's a spiritual conjuring, the old woman possesses Subai, yes, that's what it is like. Why does the old woman want to return to the old house? Is it because she is nostalgic? Definitely not, absolutely not, there must be other mysteries in it. The fat man fell into a state of talking to himself. It was obvious that his mind was thinking rapidly. Perhaps, the old woman is actually just like us, Gyatso suddenly said. As soon as these words were spoken, Subai, Fatty and the monk all looked at Gyatso. Gyatso pursed his lips when he saw that everyone was looking at him. This was the time for everyone to contribute their wisdom. The three cobblers were better than Zhuchel Yang. No matter how smart Munan was, there were four extremely outstanding seniors here. If the audience really deduced based on the clues together, they would be no worse than Munan. You have always said that we should start from small details, but if we really start from small details, this is a problem of internal conflicts within the family. For example, the boy was very young, and there were conflicts in his family. His father was closely related to the nuclear leak, and everyone in the county was killed. This also included the boy's kindergarten teacher and friends. His mother apparently died of murder, and it should have been at home. When a person is killed, it is not known whether it was his father or his grandmother. But if you were a little boy, how would you treat the rest of the family who were responsible for your mother's tragic death? I think it should be hate. He hates his family, his grandmother, his father, and maybe even his mother. Therefore, his grandmother, the old woman, who possessed Dabai last time, actually wanted to go to that house and do something. She did not want to borrow a corpse to resurrect the soul, she was extremely targeted and purpose. Gyatso analyzed. Subai seemed to suddenly remember something and said, by the way, if you want to do a ritual such as summoning spirits, what do you need? Don't you know this? The fat man looked at Subai with some surprise. The clothes on the deceased's body or something very important to the deceased, something that often accompanied him. So. Subai raised his hand, signaling the fat man to stop talking, and said, so, when did we know that this is a family of 4, and there is a 5 or 6-year-old child? From the family portrait. The fat man was stunned when he said this. He immediately realized what Subai meant and the crux of the problem. Here's the problem. When we searched the whole house before, we only found Jin's Honggayu. If Gyatso hadn't found a family photo in the wall, we wouldn't have known there was a child in the family, because we didn't see anything about the child at all. But the old woman possessing Subai happened in the last reincarnation, Gyatso reminded. Even if she took something in the last reincarnation, in this reincarnation, the things will definitely be placed. Then there is only one possibility left. The monk put the prayer beads in his hand back into his sleeve. In this reincarnation, someone took the first step to take away everything related to the little boy in that room. Someone thought of the method of summoning spirits one step earlier than us. As long as the little boy is summoned from the nuclear power plant by summoning spirits, the black ball will naturally stop exploding, and the main mission will be completed.